Has life ever thrown you a curveball? I've been thrown one, two, maybe three. Okay, if we're being honest, a few more in life. And sometimes you just need a professional to talk with it about. And friends help and family helps, but having a professional therapist has been a game changer for me because of the skills they bring into those conversations. And I want you to have access to that too. So BetterHelp have been willing to give you 10% off your first month if you sign up today with www.betterhelp.com/difference. You deserve to have somebody walking through this with you. You deserve all the healing. And a professional is the kind of person that will not only listen, but they will give you tools to walk through this journey so that you are not alone. www.betterhelp.com/difference to get 10% off your first month today. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. What if the person standing between you and your dream career isn't you? It's your boss. Today on A World of Difference, I'm sitting down with Mita Mallick, a powerhouse voice in workplace culture who's advised everyone from Fortune 500 giants to scrappy startups. Named to the Thinkers 50 radar list and featured everywhere from the New York Times to Harvard Business Review, Mita doesn't just study toxic workplaces. She's actually lived through them herself. In this conversation, Mita pulls back the curtain on the bad bosses who shaped her career, reveals the red flags you need to spot in your next job interview, and shares exactly what to do when you're stuck working for someone who's destroying your mental health. Whether you're climbing the corporate ladder, leading a team, or just trying to survive the work week, this episode will change how you think about power, leadership, and what you actually deserve from the place where you spend most of your waking hours. Let's dive in. Hi, Mita. It's so great to see you today, and I'm really excited to talk about your book, which has an amazing title. And we have a lot of readers here on the podcast, so I'm sure we have people that are dying to know more about your book, and we'll be ordering it by the end of the episode. But thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so excited, Lori. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to just dig right in. Tell us about why you wrote this book and what the title is all about.
Sure. So the book is called The Devil Emails at Midnight: What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses. It's my second book, and the genesis for this book actually starts with my mother's home being flooded and almost destroyed. And if anyone has ever been in a soaked home or a home that's been ravaged by fire, it's devastating. And I was in my childhood bedroom trying to save things. Lori, I had Barbies that were soaked that I thought would be worth something someday. I had drawings from the second grade, report cards, all these things we hold on to. And I find a notebook from my 20s. And if you meet me today in person, hopefully we'll meet sometime for coffee, you'll see I always carry a notebook with me. It's just the writer in me. I like to observe thoughts and things happening. So I had this notebook from my 20s, and I had specific nicknames for these bad bosses I had worked for during this time, vignettes and stories. And I was reading it, and it was like years later, so much emotion coming out of the pages. And so I'm driving away with my mother from her soaked home, and I had this Mean Girls burn book moment where I thought to myself, what if I'm in someone's notebook? What if someone wrote down that I was micromanaging Mita, which I was years ago if you worked for me, I'm sorry, or Maleficent, right? And so that's the genesis of the book. I thought about, I've been a bad boss, and chances are so have you. And that's the opening lines of the book. But that's how the book came to be.
Wild and so self-aware for you to walk through that at a moment that's very traumatic, having your childhood home destroyed like that. It's painful because it's memories, and it's the grief can be enormous. I haven't personally experienced it, but I know from those, we've had California wildfires around us. Of course. I worked tsunami relief where people lost everything, including family members. It's an intense amount of grief, and it's a different type of trauma that you walk through in that. But you had this moment of just looking back and understanding who you were and how you've evolved. And so I guess tell us about one of the bosses who had the most impact on your mental health. I've read the statistic that says your boss has an equal amount of influence on your mental health as your spouse, which is wild. And people tend to leave their jobs because of their managers. So tell us about yours.
Well, I've got three specifically in the book, but let's pick one. So I'll tell everyone listening, when you read the book, you'll see I've nicknamed all my bad bosses. I've done that for a reason. And I'm not interested in shaming, naming, blaming, demonizing. I hope that they're all good leaders today. But I'm going to pick Medusa. So Medusa, up until the point I worked for her, no one in my life, not my parents, not my brother, not my husband, no one had ever screamed and yelled at me like this. And I was forced to move on to her team. And she publicly, privately berated, humiliated, threw temper tantrums, tossed like pens across the room. She even threw a Chanel shoe at a colleague once. I mean, it was wild. She was the equal opportunity bully. She went after everyone, like everybody. And I went into work for those first few months scared. And there was an adrenaline rush. Fear drives short-term results. It's hard to hear, but it's true. It does. And I live in New Jersey. We were just talking about this. And sometimes I'll get this WhatsApp message. Lori, it'll be like, oh my God, there's a black bear wandering around. And you're like, is it going in the garage? Is it on the deck? Like, is it in my neighbor's yard? And people start to have this adrenaline rush. You're like, do I fight? You run as fast as you can. You're not fighting, right? But like, it's that adrenaline rush. And that's what happens in our workplaces, right? I showed up to work every day scared. I tried to outwork the bully. And what ended up happening is you couldn't make her happy. She would still come after you. And so then you get tired of being scared, right? And then what happens is you decide, well, it doesn't really matter. She's going to come after me anyway. I'm going to try to avoid her. I'm going to be under the radar. I'm going to do less work. And it's like that candle on a flame. You start to feel yourself slowly flickering out, and fear kills culture in the long term. And I still can't understand that, because I know there are people listening today who've experienced this firsthand, that there is still so many companies that have a fear-based culture. I wouldn't say necessarily the whole company, but certainly teams, right, that operate that way. And I still can't wrap my head around that.
I certainly can't either, because once you understand what happens to the brain, and you sort of mentioned some of that, which is that people go into this fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. Yes. And if you're wanting a whole brain available of your team for, if you're a CEO or a COO or you're a chief people officer and you're sitting there saying, we want to bring out the best in our talent so that we can, it's for the ROI we're a business. We're trying to, make a product. We're trying to, give the customers what they want. And so if your goal is more of that, why in the world would you do something that shuts people's brains down? And I think that it's what you mentioned is that people focus on these short-term results, but they're not playing the long game, because in the short term, people will capitulate, people will fawn, they will cross every T and dot every I to make sure they're people-pleasing that boss so that they don't get yelled at or shamed or have a Chanel shoe thrown at them like the devil wears Prada, like what? And so when that happens is, I think people are so short-sighted. They're focusing on these short little moments and not the strategic overall culture. And the fact that people are going to be walking out the back door and you're going to keep around the toxic rock star that's not helping the culture. Have you seen that too?
Yeah. I mean, I go back to Medusa. She was leading originally a team of like 12 to 14 people. And what do you think happened? Within a year and a half, that entire team turned over. They were gone. And so then what happened they moved her to another division to run another team of 12 to 14 people, which is the team I was voluntold to go on. I actually said I didn't want to work for her. And what happened? I immediately became labeled a troublemaker, a detractor, pot stirrer, not a good corporate soldier, right? Because I'm actually calling this person out on their bad behavior. And then as you read in the Devil Emails at Midnight, within just a year and a half, I left and other people left as well. And so again, when you go back to retention and the cost to replace people right now, research says it's 2.5 times. And so what's really interesting is that people aren't looking at a P&L in this way. Wouldn't it be interesting if you actually looked at the loss of talent and what's that's costing you? Because if I work for you and I'm the terrible boss and people just keep leaving my team, you are likely, or I'm calling recruiting and just saying we need more butts and seats, but no one's talking about the root cause and what's that costing. Because if you haven't fixed the root cause, likely the revolving door syndrome is going to continue.
100%. And there's, data is something, especially here in Silicon Valley, it really speaks to our tech companies. And I've been quite surprised at how often the data around retention is not either gathered or is just ignored. And I think that stat, what you're saying, the 2.5, amount to replace them, I've heard at least 2 times, but it, anecdotally has been more like what you're saying, because especially if you have a tribal leader that has all this tribal knowledge and you've not documented it, which is the case of many startup cultures, you're just trying to do everything. You have, the vice president is out buying hand soap for the bathroom. I mean, everybody's just doing everything. So there's not been a lot of let's record this and think about a succession plan. And then sometimes they grow so fast. They're a mid-sized company. They're going to a very large company, and they've just been hiring, and maybe ignoring the fact that there's a lot of people leaving out the back door and haven't really had a lot of robust data around the risk assessment of that and the profit and loss of that, because it is money walking out the door. And it's not just that. If you are, if you pay somebody, $100,000 a year, and then to replace them, you have to spend $250,000 or more, the amount of time it takes to replace them is also a factor. If it's taking 6 months or 7 months or 8, all of that is so much loss. So at the end of the day, some of it feels as though people don't want to know, because if they did, certainly they would listen. Have you seen some of that as well?
I have, especially when you're talking about startup culture, companies scaling. I work for you. You're the CEO. I'm the CMO. And I've been behaving very badly. There's a long list of people who've left. There's evidence. There's facts. And the head of HR goes to you and says, here's what we're seeing. We've done an investigation and it's time for Mita to move on. And you might say, well, Mita and I played lacrosse at Stanford together. She was in my wedding. Our kids have grown up together. We summer together every June. All these personal relationships start to weigh so heavy. And so it's really interesting when HR gets a bad rap. And listen, I'm not saying that HR is not at fault at all, but what I am saying, in most cases, it's actually, in all the cases I know, it's not HR who's making the final decision. It's you, the CEO, on whether Mita stays or goes. And you're willing to sometimes sacrifice your own reputation, your own capital to save Mita, rather than to say, what got us here won't get us there. Mita's time is to move on to something else. Why don't we help her do that, right? Why don't we help her leave with grace and move on, because she can't stay here anymore? And it's the personal relationships. It's so interesting, Lori. You can have all the systems and processes in place, and it's me as an individual who comes and wreaks havoc on the situation and makes exceptions.
It all makes sense if you sort of understand or spend any time reading about sort of Machiavellian types, or maybe narcissistic personality disorder, any of these dark triad types, that they would have people that they are having good relationships with in order to protect themselves. And ultimately, so much of what drives that type of personality type, which is about, a little over 15% of the population. So if you have a workplace with thousands of employees, you're going to have some of these individuals. And they're often going to go for these roles where they have an amount of power, maybe an HR role, maybe even a CEO. They say in Silicon Valley tech world that the rate of people who have narcissistic personality disorder, or even sometimes sociopathic tendencies, tend to want to be, they could kind of gravitate sometimes toward those roles. That I'm by no means saying that the majority of them are. That's not statistically true. Right. It just means that it's higher than than if you're looking at, I guess, postal workers, for example, And so I think it's just important to point that out, because once you understand that, then just like with any type of personality that's different, we all have different personality types. You want to understand where the strengths are, where the opportunities for growth are, and that a self-awareness piece has to be a part of the leadership development, especially in this era of AI taking over so much. We've got to understand humanity and how we lead and how we're different.
Lean into being human. Yes.
Lean into being human. And so I think that there's a lot of talk around, conflict of interest, for example. You're not allowed to, be sitting, for example, maybe on the board if you are working for a competitor and it's very open or whatever, or taking gifts or taking, money from them. However, these relationships where it does feel sometimes a bit of in that area of conflict of interest, if you're so buddy with people outside of work, where you're the godparent and you've been in their wedding and you went to college together and you're in the same country clubs and all that, then suddenly it's like, well, how do people see clearly to make good decisions. So I think that's a topic of conversation. How do you see that playing out in those areas?
I mean, I think it definitely, everything you said, yes, yes, and yes, particularly in startup culture as you're growing and scaling, right? I think sometimes with public companies, and I've worked in plenty, people are really beholden to the stock price and to the markets, and everything that you do has an impact. And that's ultimately what you're looking at. I think about the Nestle CEO, I believe recently, who was terminated without severance. And it's because it was discovered that he had a romantic relationship with someone in the organization. Again, you go to the sort of the rules that are set up. But I think when you're privately held and you have different motivations, right? And so you're not necessarily held to the markets the way a public company would be.
Yeah, I just think that there's so much being unearthed in the way leadership has been going in this country in a lot of ways, and how that intersects with business. And there's leadership is just absolutely changing. The generations, like Gen Z, is changing it on their own, but also just the climate of the political climate, the things that are happening, the way people throughout time have come from different countries around the world to settle here, and what that mixture looks like. There's so much changing. And so I think that can almost freeze people, because if, we had a lot of layoffs recently here in Silicon Valley. We're also seeing a lot of senior skilled women be ousted for questioning, for saying, I won't work with that person, and suddenly they're gone. How can you spot a bad boss during an interview process? A lot of people are interviewing right now, and they get afraid if they've had a bad experience that I won't see it the next time. What can they look for?
So my first piece of advice is make sure you can work through that trauma before you enter another workforce. Not that you'll be fully healed, but oftentimes I've brought baggage from an old job into a new job, and that new person's not guilty of any of those things. So I think about that a lot. But actually during the interview process, you're telling me. So I'm going to give you a test that my mother coined called the water test. And I remember one time I was interviewing, I had 12 interviews in one day. They were 30 minutes. They were live in the office. And it was for a big brand, big sexy brand, sexy title, like all those things, like really, really want this job. And my mother asks me how the interviews go. And she said, so did they offer you a glass of water? Did you take a break? And I was like, no. And she said, they didn't offer you a glass of water. Don't take the job. And I said, huh? What? You must be crazy. Of course I'm taking this job. But let me tell you, mom was right. And those are that's one example of signs of toxicity. Now, what do I mean? You are going into someone's, I say, home, right? If they can't offer you a glass of water, cup of tea, do you need a bathroom break? I remember asking Lori to go to the ladies' room, and they seem annoyed. It was so bizarre. And I go back and look at all those things, right? Other signs when you think about the interview process, it's the movie trailer, right? It's a window into what it's going to be like to work there. So if they're hot and cold, if they want you to come in tomorrow and drop everything, if they want you to accept an offer on the spot, watch for all that, their interactions. Watch for, during the interview process, nonverbals. Do people you're interviewing with look bored, disinterested, disengaged? What's your future boss like? Are they talking over you? Are they taking up all the space? Are they interrupting you? Are they on their phone? Are they repeatedly late without any rhyme or reason? Do they disparage the company? I've been in an interview. I'm whispering like no one else is listening to us. I've been in an interview when somebody was disparaging the company. This place is a dumpster fire. And I'm like, well, if that's not a sign, I don't know what to say. Are they saying that? Are they making fun of something on your resume? What's Bengali? That's my first language. Is that really a language? I had someone once say that to me. My additional information, I speak fluent Bengali. Those things, right? Look for all of that. The signs are there. Don't ignore them. And then the final thing is, I always say, once you get the offer, you're in the driver's seat. Don't ask for 10, ask for 2 to 3 more strategic introductions. Go ask to meet with your boss again so you can have the honest conversation, the future boss. You could say, I'm going to really work closely with legal. I didn't meet with anyone in the legal department. Do you mind if I get a 20-minute catch up with someone? If they want you, in most cases, they will do this. And then you can ask some more questions. And then listen, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, all these things we have to take with a grain of salt, but you can do your reference check. Companies do reference checks on us. Do reference checks. Ask around. And most people will take, I'm going to tell you, if I had a really bad or really good experience somewhere and someone DMs me and says, I'm looking at this company, would you talk to me for 15 minutes? I'm likely to reach out. And then you have to sort of think about like balance what people are saying. But there are so many ways to try to prepare yourself. And then in some cases, people will push back and saying, I didn't see any of those signs. And sometimes you don't. And there's really nothing you can do about it. Don't be too hard on yourself if you didn't see the signs.
Love that. And so true. Some people don't see them, and often it's designed for some people not to see it so that others are being targeted. And that's the crazy making aspect of it all, which is wild. But also I love the whole, we run references on the company. I've never heard anybody say that, but that is absolutely brilliant. I mean, certainly I've heard people say we're interviewing each other. Almost like,
we're not,
but
we're not. There's a power dynamic.
There is a power dynamic.
There's an opening on my team. You want it badly. You're going to show up to be your best self. You're going to, as much as you can, right? And then I'm saying when you get the offer, then it's equal playing field and start asking some of those questions.
That makes sense. That is where the power dynamic changes a bit. And but I do love that looking for the body language. Good Lord, the water test. I mean, that is just the most, if your basic hierarchy of needs.
She was right. She was right. I was like, oh,
she was
God.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Lunch. Let's not forget that. I didn't have lunch. It was like a long day.
Yeah, gosh, they didn't. So your hierarchy of needs weren't met. Food, water, need to go to the bathroom.
Basics.
Like Maslov is like, what's happening? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So Bengali, is your mom, dad who's Bengali? Are they both? Were you born here?
They were both born and raised in India, so West Bengal, Kolkata. So I was born and raised here with my younger brother, and my first language was Bengali. That's what I
love it. That's so nice. And in your home with your parents, you speak Bengali with them, or you speak English?
I do. Yeah, I do. I do with my mom. Yeah.
That's awesome. Also, do you have, because I just have to go there, do you have special dishes from that region of India that are your favorite that you make or that your mom makes?
God, my mom, I mean, listen, I'm trying to learn some of her cooking, but she's the best. Chicken curry, egg curry. I mean, there's so many amazing dishes.
All the curries.
She makes. Yeah, all the curries.
You're making me hungry.
Yeah.
Speaking of not giving you lunch, like exactly.
I know, just as we talked about the company that didn't feed me or offer me
Oh
lunch.
my gosh. It's horrible. But I love that you're giving us those warnings because we need them. There's this whole, people go into job interviews just expecting a certain humanity. And if you aren't looking through it, it can be a window into what to expect. But you've advised Fortune 500 companies and startups on workplace culture. I want to know, what's the biggest difference you've seen in how these organizations approach leadership and employee well-being?
I think particularly as we're talking about in the race to embrace AI and the pressure that's on leaders in the market right now, companies that are getting it right are companies who are really focusing on well-being and what it means to be a good leader. And the connection is, people ask me this all the time. When do you see bad boss behaviors exhibit? Tell me, like, how do I know if I'm being a bad boss? Here's the honest truth. When we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to behave badly. So the foundation for good leadership, and this is anti-hustle culture, right? And I'll say this, I have a book that just came out. I am working really hard, but that's not sustainable. I'm not an Uber app. So leaders need to be able to figure out drive times and drive periods, when you're going to rest and recover and when you're going to drive again. And so are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Are you hydrated, right? Are you going for walks? Are you getting exercise? All of these things. And you think about performance leadership, right? What's the competitive edge? That's it, right? Just like we used to talk about years ago, diverse teams perform better. Some of the most, famous survey results coming from McKinsey. Teams focused on well-being have to. I'm convinced, right? Because that's when you're taking care of yourself, you can take care of other people.
Absolutely. And I think we're just in this wild time, at least sitting here in Silicon Valley. I hear a lot about this whole trending 996, where people work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And it's this notion that somehow we're going to outrace China in the AI race, and all these wild assertions about superhumans, which don't exist. But the reality is, there's this research out of Stanford that says if you work more than 50 hours a week, your productivity goes down. So if productivity is the goal, then quantity, quality, these are the conversations. More is not more. Less is more, because, you know, you want to make sure you're getting the quality out of the hours that you have. So I think what you're saying is true. These are the conversations, right?
They are. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there are cycles, right? But we have to be aware of what those drive cycles are. But that's really scary, what you're talking about. And I've heard the stat, and I know so many listening have too, and the new trend that's happening. You're going to burn out a generation of talent. That talent that you've hired, this is not sustainable to do this. And so that's where it's like, okay, so then what are you going to do when those people are burned out and hopefully can recover and take care of themselves? It makes no sense. And I also find that when leaders don't know what to do, and there's so much chaos and turmoil in the market, I know you're nodding, so I know you're going to know where I'm going on this. You go back to like the most basic KPI of like, how much are people working? That doesn't translate to quality and change. It just doesn't. I mean, the whole coffee badging thing, like, let me make sure people are in the office and watching. I mean, all these, you're like, how much are they online? And you're like, why aren't you focused on the deliverables? Like, focus on the output. Because if you're focused on the output and you give people accolades for the output and not how much they're working, but the quality of what they're getting done, they're going to give you even more great work, because you let them, treated them like adults and let them do their job on their own time. They're going to be happy to continue working for you and delivering great results.
Yeah, I kind of have this, I think I've said for a while about my direct reports. It's, you know, outcomes are what I'm looking for.
Yes.
I don't care how you got there. You can be standing upside down on the Golden Gate Bridge and doing that 2 hours a day. And if that gets you the outcomes, great. I don't care when and how you work, but just get the work done and do it well. That's what matters to me. But it increasingly seems as though that's not the focus. It's how and where people work. There's a lot more push toward these 4 and 5 day in the office, checking badges. And, you know, we have, like, I've heard a lot of cities, not just here in Silicon Valley, but people saying in Boston and different places, the traffic is back to pre-pandemic levels. So we've got hour and a half long commutes each way. So people are in the car 2 and 3 hours a day. And if they're doing that now 4 and 5 days a week, all of a sudden, again, productivity is going to go down, because humans have not been able to supersede their need for water and using the bathroom and food. I mean, these are basic. You need exercise. Yeah, exactly.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that certainly in sports teams and maybe more, you know, health related companies, they kind of prioritize that because they have to. But I think there's something for all industries to learn from that. And the trend is going in a direction that's very troubling for a lot of us as we watch it. Looking back, I'm interested to know if you could go back to your younger self when it comes to navigating workplace dynamics. What's a piece of advice you would give your younger self?
So I just wrote a piece about this. It was National Daughters Day not too long ago. And I wrote a piece in Entrepreneur, which was an open letter to my daughter, talking about setting boundaries in work. And the boundary I talked about is that you teach people how to treat you. And I'll never forget, and this is in the Devil Emails at Midnight, the boss who decided he didn't want to call me by my name, so he renamed me Muhammad. And my full name is Mita Mallick, and for all the reasons you would suspect, it's been a source of embarrassment and joy throughout my life. And when I left graduate school, I decided I'm going to rename Mita. I'm going to reclaim it, not rename it, reclaim it, because I'd gone by Mita for so long. And so many people told me not to do it. You know, you're not going to get called back from your resume. It's too complicated. It's too long. I said, no, this is my name. And I'll never forget, Lori, I joined this workplace. I joined this team, and he didn't want to learn how to say Mita. He didn't want to call me Mita, and he decided to rename me Muhammad. And it would be like, Muhammad, go get the sales samples. Muhammad, the agency's here. Muhammad, are you coming to lunch? And this went on and on for longer than I like to admit. And I said to my daughter, it's like, you teach people how to treat you. And in those first moments, it's really important to look them directly in the eye and say, my name is Mita. Please call me Mita. You either do it directly, you do it with humor, and that's because you set those boundaries on the respect that you are owed and you deserve. It's not a workplace luxury respect. It's a basic need, right? It's the basis for inclusion and why people stay. And so that's what I wish I had done. And I wish other people had looked out for me and seen that was happening and stopped that. The sad part about that is we know how bullies operate. So if I stand up to the bully's going to know, oh, can't mess with her. They'll find another target. That's a conversation for the day, but they'll find another target. But that is what I wish I could go back and tell myself, that like, you have a right to set boundaries and you are owed that respect.
I wish you could go back and tell yourself that too. And just, I wish you had people who had stood up for you, because that's what you needed,
Yes.
for them to call you Mother Mita. And then also, in my experience, bullies love the whole name calling thing. It's part of the emotional abuse to reframe you.
Childhood. Yeah. It's like it's interesting, isn't it? That childhood nursery that some of us grew up with. Sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you. Names hurt so much, don't they? And you go back to classrooms and playgrounds and the name calling, and those people all grew up and they're in the conference rooms and hallways of our companies. And so, yes, to your point, like looking out for each other. We spend too much time at work not to look out for each other. That's what I think. Like, if we care enough about what you do and the people around you, then help each other and stand up for each other.
Absolutely. And, it's sort of, there's a lot of arrested development I've seen in workplaces, a shocking amount here in Silicon Valley, where, some of the same elementary school or middle school dynamics of bullying are just playing out in the workplace. Part of me just thinks, please, people, just go to therapy and learn, become self-aware. But also, I think that as we grow older, if we are having sort of normal human development, we aren't like we were in our 20s. We are still very vulnerable in our 20s.
Yes.
In the workplace, we're learning what that is. And there's some recent, Dr. Erin Meyer, who's an incredible researcher around cross-cultural dynamics in the workplace. And she's written a book called The Culture Map, which I think is the Bible, and many of us do. She had something recently that she posted about a little poll on LinkedIn where she asked, what do you think forms your idea of what a workplace should be most? And she had your childhood family, your first workplace environment in your 20s, and she had some other options like 30s, 40s, whatever. And it's actually the workplace environment in your 20s, where you're first starting your full-time roles, that form what you think work should be. And if you're experiencing bullying and they're not giving you water and like all that kind of wild stuff, that's frightening.
Well, that also it becomes normalized. And so what you tolerate is on a different level because you don't know any better. You think this is, that's part of what happens too, is the behavior gets normalized in your mind.
It really does. And it should not be, because it's very inhumane. And even though we understand the psychology around people who might freeze or fawn or have a flight response in a bullying situation, I do so appreciate people in my life who've stood up for me in those moments, and, have appreciated when I have not been trauma responding and have been able to do that for others. But it is not easy. It's a very difficult thing to do because you do put yourself at personal risk. And I think we're seeing that on a national level right now, with governors and presidents and all kinds of things happening. But it is, it's a time to learn. It's a time to pay attention. Who do we want to be in the face of a bully in our best moments, when we are, when we can regulate our nervous system and use our tools and do box breathing or whatever we've got to do to make it through. And I think that is kind of the part of the well-being of the office going forward. I hope that we lean into those parts of who we are, understanding our brains, our nervous systems, how humans interact in a sociological sense. And I think books like yours are helping us get to that conversation. And I think it is a conversation we're still trying to work through. I would love for people to know how to find you and more of your writing and your work and what you're doing. So as we're finishing up, would you let us know how to find more of you?
I hope you all check out the book. This was a great conversation. Thank you for having me on. It's called The Devil Emails at Midnight: What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses. It just made the USA Today bestseller list and LA Times. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, your local independent bookstore. You can find me at mitamallick.com, and I love meeting people on LinkedIn. So shoot me a message there. Thank you.
Congratulations on your success of your book. And I hope more people get to read it and have these conversations and book clubs and, managers with their one-on-ones with their direct reports and all kinds of C-suite leaders that need to read books like this.
Apparently people are giving it to their bosses anonymously. I don't think we talked about that, Lori. They're delivering it to current and former bosses. There's a way to do it on Amazon. Anyways, I'll let everyone... people are like, I just got it anonymously. I'm like, it's a gift. Take it as that. I'm sure someone's going to send it back. My own book to me anonymously. Who knows? But yes.
Yeah, right. That is actually hilarious, and I love it so much. It's certainly a way to make a difference, and I love that you can do it anonymously. Well, whether you're ordering this book anonymously to send to your former boss, or whether you're reading it for yourself and you're workplaces and your communities, maybe with your
Yes.
family. Maybe we've all experienced something like that and you want to get together with your siblings and read it. I think books like these are really making a difference. So please go order her book and give her a great review. And thanks for being on the show today, Mother Mita. And we will have you with us in our Patreon community. I'm going to ask you one more question. So difference makers, make sure to head over to Patreon. That'll be uploaded there soon. And thanks once again for being on the show today.
Thank you.
If this conversation hit home for you, I guarantee it will resonate with someone you know. Maybe it's a friend who's been venting about their boss for months, a family member considering a job offer out there right now, or a colleague who just needs permission to set better boundaries. Share this episode with them. Text it, post it, talk about it. Because here's the truth. We've normalized toxic leadership for way too long. It's time for a change. We are in the driver's seat of how the future of work unfolds. And conversations like this one, whether you're a manager, a leader, a CEO, somebody who's looking for a job, this is how we start changing that. We get to create the future of work that we want. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to hear Mita's unfiltered stories from inside the C-suite that we couldn't share necessarily on here because she recorded it on there with us, head over to Patreon and join our community of supporters at patreon.com/aworldofdifference. Trust me, this exclusive episode is worth it. It'll be posted there in a few days, so go join us over there now. Thanks for listening to A World of Difference. Until next time, remember, you don't have to accept less than you deserve, especially from the people leading you. Okay, difference makers, I know you, and I know when you hear something you really enjoyed and you learned from it, you want to share it. I am like that too, which is why I love to promote guests on this podcast for you to get to hear them yourself. Sometimes they write books, sometimes they write on Substack, sometimes they podcast, sometimes their voice is just every day in the workplace where they live and impact their communities in a variety of ways with all the hats that they wear. So if you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you did, please share it with a friend, a parent, a neighbor, somebody you went to boarding school with back in the day, somebody at work, your boss, people on your team, because this is a message they needed to hear. And it have impacted you. Please give us a 5-star rating and give us a review. It really helps our reach for more people like you to find us, the difference makers, the listeners, the leaders, the people in your communities that are making the world a better place. I appreciate you so much. Are you on Substack? Because I am, and I'd love to connect with you there. I process things there over Saturdays and Sundays, days off, sometimes weeknights as I'm researching and reading other articles, and it inspires me to write things where I'm going deeper into the behind the scenes of what some of the episodes on A World of Difference are all about. I'd love to connect with you there. So if you are on Substack, find me. You can go to loriadamsbrown.substack.com as a free, or I would prefer a paid subscriber, because then you get access to more of the in-depth things that are exclusively for my paid subscribers. I keep my prices as low as they can be on Substack, as low as they allow. But I do believe in being paid for my work, and I believe you should be paid for yours too. So join me there and let's make a difference together.